Hey and welcome back. If you're here, you've most likely seen the first part of this mini-series, so to speak. And that's great, but if you haven't, watch it. Go watch it now. Please. Anyway, in my previous video, I discussed the aliens, and in this one, I'm discussing humans, and not quite humans. So as always, sit back, relax, and grab one of those Dr. Breen bust things, because I'll be covering the relevant human NPCs and their involvement in the disaster. And as with the previous video, as we scale the power meter to the top, it becomes more interesting and involved. So the scientists and the blue boys are kind of on the same level, but the scientists in fact have a higher clearance level, an average of 5. We see in Blue Shift that Barney has a level of just 3. This quickly becomes quite irrelevant when the main way to judge someone becomes their combat abilities, but at the same time, a lot of stuff went on before the disaster. But they're kind of similar, so I'm just going to put them together. Peanut Butter and Jelly, Walter and Barney. These guys are at the very bottom, reduced to cannon fodder for horror or comedic effect, or simply to teach players game mechanics such as those laser thingies to save us from a similar fate. In universe, they get up to much more. An interesting thing to note is that when we play the chapter Questionable Ethics, the scientists have done some pretty messed up stuff to the Zen creatures, including torture, weapon testing, and even constructing giant machines made to destroy them in the most efficient ways. Or examine them, right? This adds another bit of depth to them, suggesting that they're pretty messed up. In their defense though, it's their job, so maybe the administrator's responsible. Not that we're talking about him now. There's a pretty cool level of irony to the scientists getting absolutely destroyed by the aliens they exploited, but they're not really high enough on the pecking order to be responsible. The HECU and Black Ops are also following orders, which are likely a lot stricter. As I've said before, some Marines even talk about how they don't want to shoot civilians in OP4. Some of them are particularly sadistic, but the same can be said for most military people. Or most people. This next section is going to be based a lot more on speculation and stuff, but it has to be, for certain reasons. At the time of the events that took place during Half-Life, Wallace Breen was the administrator. He was basically in charge of almost everything, from how the lab functions to the ridiculous ties. But this is where it gets juicy. So at the start of the game, we see G-Man talking to a scientist. Could the scientist have actually been Breen? Pretty fishy if you ask me. We then find out, just before everything goes wrong, that he went to some lengths to get it. That being the crystal. Some lengths? A negotiation with the G-Man? I mean, if not, it was one of his employees, same difference. So G-Man clearly wants this crystal examined. In fact, to further support this, we see him stealing one in Decay, which ends up being the one that triggers the disaster. Of course, there's no originality to this. I'm not going to pretend that you guys don't know that the G-Man has been tampering with things all along, and that's kind of the point he's there. But while we could assume that the some length statement refers to the dead HEVs we see in Zen, that likely isn't the case, since it's pretty clear that the G-Man has provided the sample as part of his master plan. Breen is fully aware of the G-Man. He makes reference to Gordon's stasis and tells Gordon his services are open to the highest bidder. G-Man obviously knew that this particular crystal would have this particular effect, and he was adamant in getting it examined to trigger the disaster. But this is where things get a bit iffier, purely because of how little we know about the G-Man. He either wanted the destruction of Earth, or he wanted the Combine to attack Earth as some sort of master plan to take them down. He'd need an incredible amount of foresight that only a highly intelligent advanced being with more powerful superiors could have. The former goal seems counterproductive. If the G-Man wanted Earth's destruction, why would he bother to save Gordon and push him forward? The way I see it is this: the G-Man must have notified Breen about what would happen, promising him power if he did his bidding, or even threatened him. This could have been a way to manipulate Breen into lighting the fuse, or he could have been contacted directly by the Combine themselves. This one seems a little less likely, but if Black Mesa had very direct contact with Zen, why not the Combine? We know that the Combine are unable to travel within a universe, only between them, so they wouldn't successfully be able to invade us without a miracle, a deliberate setup, or a collaboration of Combine and human teleportation technology. Some people have argued that the Combine don't exist in Half-Life 1, so this can't be true. I disagree. The Nilanth is situated in Zen, the last of his kind, escaping a threat. As far as we know, none of the species on Zen are native. In Zen, the Nilanth was cornered. If you want in-game examples, listen for example to how he says, "We are their slaves." Whose slaves? Well, the Combine. If that's not satisfactory enough, take Word of God instead. Mark Laidlaw seals it. What we saw in Half-Life 1 was the very end of a long struggle between the Combine and the last of the Nilanth's race. The Nilanth's world, if it could be said to have, was long since in the past as far as the Nilanth was concerned. Zen was their final retreat. They had their back to the wall, as it were, when the fissure appeared that let them spill into our dimension. Zen itself is a sort of dimensional transit bottleneck, an area of continual contention. I love this quote because it directly tells us that the Combine are indeed intended to be in the first game behind the scenes. This makes the story of Half-Life 2 make a lot more sense. If you watched my previous video with my point about the Nihilants not being 100% evil, but certainly not being the primary antagonist, that should make a lot more sense now too. See, I told you to watch it. With all that being said, in my humble opinion, Breen is the man to blame for the events of the games. Breen negotiated with the G-Man, indirectly causing the resonance cascade, allowing Zen and later Combine forces into Earth. The Combine are the big bad, but Breen is a facilitator. I mean, if it isn't Breen behind this, why is he the specific man chosen for the role of Earth's ruler? He's a scientist, not a politician, not a diplomat, a scientist. The Combine had like 7.5 billion other people to choose. And yes, the population likely took a massive hit during the 7-hour war, but are you telling me that out of every human left on Earth, there was not one qualified man or woman? And then, regardless of profession, out of anyone they could have chosen at random, they chose Breen? Seems legit. Let's go a little deeper. If we assume that the G-Man set the Combine up, allowing them to invade only to fall, wouldn't that mean he'd need to intend for Breen to fall the whole time, tempting him with empty power? Yes, it would, but there's evidence for that too. First is simple. Gordon becomes an advanced killing machine in one day, able to take on the Combine's strongest forces. This is the G-Man's doing, undoubtedly. Gordon should have died multiple times, including possibly during the resonance cascade where he's knocked out, the Citadel reactor explosion, the train explosion, and well, most enemy encounters actually. The G-Man has no qualms when it comes to punishing those who don't follow his instructions, as seen in the choice he gives Gordon at the end of Half-Life, and his attitude towards Gordon altering Alex's fate with the Vorts. If any of this was remotely against the G-Man's plan, Gordon would be screwed, but he's not. He's praised. He's hired again, and G-Man really doesn't seem to like Breen, criticizing him for being a naysayer when it came to him taking Alex from Black Mesa. He also suggests that, despite his wishes, he wasn't permitted to kill him directly. This not only suggests that the G-Man is himself overseen by more powerful superiors, hinting that this could have easily been orchestrated, but also suggests that this is exactly what G-Man was using Gordon for in Half-Life 2. The first thing you see of note is a Breen cast. The last thing you do before you're put back in stasis is kill him. Even this suggests that this was Gordon's purpose. His mission was over, and thus was the game. Breen's death, or perhaps the way in which it's done, frenzied the Combine. This was all the will of the man in the blue suit. And that's all for today. There are several different ways you could take the evidence given in the game. He could have been tricked, he could be evil, he could be the future Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Anyway, without further ado, I'm legally obligated to read the nice boy list, so thank you to the following people. The Game Studios, Tuna Buck Edgeder, if that's how you say it, and Nova Castro for being patrons, and another big thank to Jimmy Broadbent and Nova Castro again for donating on my streams. It's a big help and it goes towards equipment for the channel. So again, thanks for watching. I love you.